Welcome everyone to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center, sponsored by Fieldstone Communities Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers innovative and compassionate care. They're now accepting residents. They also offer day stay and respite programs. Call 360-689-4314 to schedule a tour of Fieldstone's beautifully appointed apartments on Rolling Bay today. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge that the Senior Community Center is on the ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish tribe, the people of the clear salt water. We honor them and are grateful for their hospitality. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm very happy to have with us Tom West, who is with Housing Kitsap. He's local here on the island, managing two properties, not one, but two, FinchPlace and Rhododendron. Tom is going to enlighten us on the process of how do folks apply for housing? What is the process like? What do people need to know? This is, I was just saying before we got started here that this is just such a huge mystery, I know, for a lot of us. I know a lot of folks, perhaps have some stress and anxiety, and there's some confusion. Tom, I know you're so knowledgeable about all of this, and so we're just really happy to have you here and to, again, give us some information, help us understand the process better. So thank you, Tom. Welcome. And I'm going to turn the mic over to you now.
Great, thank you, and thanks everybody for being here. I appreciate it. My goal with being here is to really get the message out about the process of applying and getting into affordable housing, sharing strategies and techniques that you can use in the journey. The audience for the bulk of this conversation really is the applicants, or prospective applicants for affordable housing. Those are the people that I really want to get most of this information. My hope is that being a part of this discussion will open up opportunities through other organizations or other groups where I can get in front of these people. The typical demographic of people applying for this are people that have a lot of things going on in their lives. They've got a lot of stressors beyond either being not housed enough or not housed at all. So it's getting in front of them can be really, really challenging. A little bit about myself. I've been doing affordable housing for a little bit over 3 years. I've been with Housing Kitsap since May of this year. Previously, I was with affordable housing through a nonprofit. I was up in Port Townsend, and then I managed a property in Silverdale. I have been exclusively at USDA rural development properties. A couple of them layered with tax credit, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a few minutes. Housing Kitsap has approximately 21 properties countywide. We are strictly, as far as actually owning and managing properties in Kitsap County, we are the official housing authority for Kitsap County. The caveat to that is that Bremerton has their own housing authority. I'm not sure how that works or what the dynamic is between the two. I haven't really been here long enough to know all of that. It's a little bit outside of my scope of work. And I've been busy getting to know my property, so I haven't delved too much into that side of it yet. That are available to anybody who wants to participate in them. One that I particularly love is our self-help housing, which is really modeled after the Habitat for Humanity program, where you apply, you throw in some sweat equity. If you've got any cash, you can throw some cash in, but you basically help build a house for you and your family. Part of the down payment is that sweat equity component. We do that in Kitsap and Mason counties. Our biggest hurdle with that program is finding affordable land. That's really the one thing that holds us back from putting a project like that in place, say on Bainbridge Island, which we would love to do. But Bainbridge Island is unique in our community. It's pretty spendy, including bare land. So there's some roadblocks there that we're always looking for opportunities to either collect grant money to help defray some of those costs, or find other community partners to team up with to do something like that. And even to the extent of even putting in additional apartment communities, which we would love to do. There is a massive demand for affordable housing, not just on Bainbridge, but throughout all of the western side of the state. Quite frankly, it's rough out there. To give you an example of that, every property that I've been at has had a wait list of at least 300 applications on it. That's a lot of people looking for housing. My wait list for Rhododendron was over 500 people, 500 individual applications. So it's not total family members, individual applications. So it's a lot. The thing that I'd like to talk about, and really the message I'm trying to get to prospective applicants, is how to navigate a really intimidating, kind of scary process, which is the application and then being on a wait list. Every affordable housing community has a wait list, and the wait list can go from a year to 5 years. I had people on my wait list when I was up at Port Downs and then applied back in 2014, and they were still calling every 6 months or so to find out where they were on the wait list. Did I have any availability? Things like that. One of the things that is kind of a misunderstanding with people is, you hear about people who've been on wait lists for a long, long time. There's a lot of reasons why that might be the case. It's not just you're offered a unit, but you don't accept it. There could be very valid reasons why you're not accepting it. One of them is you're locked into a lease. So you might be in an affordable housing community that's in an area that you don't want to be in. But if you're in a lease, the manager, the people that own that property don't have to allow you to break that lease. Even if it would be the kinder way to go, it's not an obligation. And so sometimes people can't accept the unit when they're offered it because it's their circumstances don't allow. Maybe they don't have enough money to make the move at the time, and they don't know that there's resources out there where they can get that money. And that's part of the message I have for people is that, not all managers want to do this, but they can come to me and say, hey, I got offered an apartment, but I don't have enough money to make this move. Let's sit down and have a conversation, and let's talk about the resources that are available to help that become successful. So the first thing that I want people to understand is that every community is different. Every community has different funding sources, and every funding source comes with its own rules and regulations with how that property is managed. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And when you accept funding, or you accept with the tax credit program, you accept deferred taxes or elimination of taxes, things like that, there's always rules and restrictions that are put on those properties. I'm going to talk a little bit about USDA RD and tax credit because those are the ones I'm most familiar with. I'll talk a little bit about Section 8, but really RD and tax credit are the funding sources I've worked with the most. So one of the things that applicants should be doing when they're applying is ask for a copy of the tenant selection plan. Every affordable housing community has a tenant selection plan, and that tenant selection plan is the rules that the property has to follow with managing their wait list, with accepting applications, with approving applications, with verifying that your income qualified or that you fit the demographic of the property. So knowing as much as you can about the property and how it's managed as an applicant is really important information because it will tell you what are the income restrictions, what are the demographic restrictions. For instance, FinchPlace is 62 and older or disabled. You have to meet one of those two criteria in order to be a resident here. The caveat to that is that the head of household meets those requirements. So, or somebody in the household meets that. So if you've got a family that is all under 62, but one of them is disabled, they're qualified, right? It doesn't make any difference. It could be a child, it could be a spouse, it could be a partner. As long as somebody meets that criteria, they're qualified. At Rhododendron, my multifamily property, it's simply income and household size. With household size, the rule is 2 + 1, so 2 people per bedroom plus 1 is the standards we go by. So in a 1-bedroom, you can have up to 3 people living in that, but no more. In a 2-bedroom, you can have up to 5, but no less than 2 to reside in there. The caveat to that is if we've exhausted the wait list that is 2 people or more, and we can't find anybody to put in that apartment, we can put a single person in a 2-bedroom, but there's a big caveat to that too. If a family of 2 applies, we have to give a 30-day notice to vacate to that single person, even if we don't have a 1-bedroom available. And I know that sounds incredibly cruel, and it is to the individual, but those are the rules that we have to follow given our funding sources. So it's the USDA is a federal program. They put down the rules on how we manage the property, and that's one of the rules we have to go by. So knowing those things as an applicant gives you the ability to ask some questions of the property manager when you're applying. So you can go in and say, hey, you know, how many people are on your, as a single person, I'm going to talk about single people for the most part, because that's the bulk of all of my waiting list. As a single person, you can go in and say, hey, I want to apply. Can you tell me where I'm at on your waiting list? And you've always got an assigned number. You fit somewhere on that waiting list based on when you apply. So if you're number 1 on the wait list for a single bedroom and there's no single bedrooms available, you can then ask, do you have any 2 bedrooms available, and have you exhausted your 2-bedroom person wait list? And if the answer is yes, I've exhausted that wait list, then I would like you to put me in any 2 bedrooms you have available, with the understanding that if somebody comes in that's qualified for that unit, that I have to then vacate again. Right. So
Tom, can I ask a quick question on
yeah,
that?
of course.
So just to clarify, is that information that a person would specifically have to ask for, or would that it all be offered to them?
So it is information they should ask for. It's in the tenant selection plan, and it's in the guidelines that we follow. But when we're talking to an applicant, we're answering a lot of questions. We're having a really long conversation. That's not necessarily information that's going to pop into our head to share, because it's not common. It's really, really, really uncommon, because there's a lot of people on the 2-bedroom wait list, and the odds of me exhausting that list without finding somebody wanting to move in is very, very low. So I don't tend to share information that has such a low probability, but I do want to share that as general information to give applicants the tools they need to be successful, even if it's on a short-term basis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. So
the other reason that
like
it's really important to share is that property managers, particularly in affordable housing, are incredibly busy people. They're doing a lot of tasks. They're doing all the same tasks that market rate housing managers do, but then they're also doing income certifications, which market rate housing managers don't do. And they're doing it every single year for every single resident, as well as all of the applicants that are applying. When I send out unit availability notification letters, I'm sending that out to 5 different families at a time, and I'm doing income qualification for all of them at the same time, on top of all the other things that I'm required to do, on top of maintaining the property and all of the managerial duties. So it's not information that would typically be shared. And quite frankly, it's not information that most managers would share, because they're trying to get that unit filled as quickly as possible, because that's part of our performance metrics is how quickly we get somebody into that unit. So it's without disparaging any of my colleagues, whether they work for the same company or other companies, not all managers have the same vested interest in being an advocate for their community, meaning the people that are not necessarily living there, but people that want to live there. But it's a passion of mine, which is why I share the information.
Great, thank you. That's really
Absolutely.
helpful.
So knowing about the community and how that community is funded is really important. There's a tremendous amount of information about the funding sources. Once you know what they are, you can go onto any of the websites, whether it's the tax credit website or it's the USDA website. They can be difficult to navigate, but you can always call the property manager and say, hey, do you have a link you can share with me to the regulations that govern your property? And I'm happy to send that. I don't think I've got any of my colleagues at Housing Kitsap that would not be happy to share those links that talk about those funding sources. The other thing that's important to know about the funding sources and their rules is that we are required to abide by the stricter of the rules within each aspect of that. And as an example, I've pulled out the income qualification numbers for both tax credit and rural development, or RD, which is what we usually call it. So in order to get into, as a single person, in order to get into a rural development property, you cannot make more, currently, you cannot make more than $63,100 a year. That's the moderate income level for Kitsap County. With RD, we have 3 separate wait lists. We have the moderate income wait list, we have the low income wait list, which caps out at $57,600 a year. And then we have the very low income wait list, which caps out at $36,050 a year. We have to fill our vacancies starting with the very low income list first. So those all have priority, right? So realistically, if you make more than the cap for very low income, that $36,050, your odds of getting a unit availability letter from me are quite a bit lower than, it's going to be a long time, right? If you're in the moderate income bucket, your chances are very, very slim that you're ever going to get the unit availability letter from me, because there's always more people applying at the very low income level. And if you applied 5 years ago at the moderate income level and somebody applies today at the low income level or very low income level, they get in front of you in the line. So the goal of RD is to provide housing for the most financially needy people in the community. So from that perspective, this is a very good rule. From the perspective of people that are in the low income level, it's heartbreaking, because market rate housing is outside of their reach in most cases. Rentals for market rate housing is very, very high. When you add the tax credit layer, it gets a lot more difficult. So tax credit has the same type of restrictions, has the 3 wait lists, and basically what they boil down to is 30, 50, or 80% of area median income, or AMI. The thing to remember is that not all of the programs use the same AMI number. So tax credit uses the median income number of $102,500 for Kitsap County. That's median income according to them. I don't have in front of me what the RD median income number is, but it's not completely different. I think it's a little bit lower than that, so their numbers are a little bit more generous. But in order to get into any property that has a tax credit funding layer, you cannot make more than $21,630. So even though you might qualify at very low income under the RD rules, if they have a tax credit layer, you're not going to get in at all, because you have to be that low to get in. $21,630 is the maximum. Fortunately for me, I don't have a tax credit layer on my properties currently, so I can let a lot more people in than if I had that tax credit layer. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that that number only applies at move-in. So that the tax credit income restrictions no longer apply once you're a resident of that property. Then you follow whatever other guidelines are funding that property. So if I had a tax credit layer, you get in, but then for all subsequent certifications, which you have to do annually, as long as you don't exceed that $63,100, you can remain a resident of my properties. If you make $63,101 in any given year, then I have to ask you to voluntarily vacate. We would probably not get an eviction based on somebody as close to that income layer. The odds of that are very low, but it's a possibility. It just depends on what the leadership would decide at that point. That's something that would be outside of my decision-making rules. So that kind of talks about the programs and some of the restrictions that you would run into, which is an example of why it's important to know about the properties and the rules that govern how they're managed, because it's all based on the funding sources. So I want to talk a little bit about some successful strategies that people can use as an applicant or a current resident on a wait list. So one of the most important things, and this is something that everybody needs to just take incredibly seriously, keeping your contact information current with every property that you've applied at is absolutely critical. I just went through, it was 890 some odd applications between my two properties. I just sent out waitlist update letters to every single one of those applicants, and either I didn't get any responses or I got return to sender letters from the post office. Everybody that had a return to sender letter is automatically removed from my wait list. That's in the tenant selection plan. Those are the rules I have to follow. The huge majority of those people are all people that could have called me and said, this is my current mailing address, so that if I send out that waitlist update letter, it will get to them and they can respond saying that they want to remain on the wait list. But if I can't reach them, they're not going to know. If I've got a unit available for them and I can't reach them, they're not going to know. I can't pick up the phone and call all the people that I need to notify because I'm required to send a letter, but the amount of time I have available to me in my day doesn't allow for a phone call to every single person that I'm letting know we're updating our wait list, right? I can't call almost 1,000 people. And every single one of our properties is doing this. This is an annual project. We do it every year. I do it during the month that people applied. So if you applied in January of every subsequent year, you're going to get a waitlist update letter from me asking if you wish to remain on the wait list. You have to respond to that letter in writing. You can't call me. You have to, it's in the tenant selection plan. It has to be in writing. So you can send an email, you can send a letter, you can send a fax, you can send your friend in a car to drop the letter off. As long as it's in writing, you'll remain on the wait list. But if I don't have your address, you're going to get removed from the wait list. So if you're talking to people that are on the wait list or want to be on the wait list, the number one thing to really get them to understand is that communicating your current mailing address is critical. Even if it's general delivery in whatever community you live in, make sure that we know, and then check with that post office at least once a week, because you've only got 14 days for that letter from the day it was postmarked to respond. So it's a limited amount of time. One of the things that I like to advise applicants do is keep a logbook of everywhere that they apply. So if you're applying at 5, 6, 7, 10 properties, get a notebook, write down the day and time that you applied, and then every 3 to 6 months, pick up the phone and give them a call. Stop by. When you communicate with them, you want to log that you communicated with them and log the conversation. Some of the things that I advise people ask: what is my current position on the wait list? What number is assigned to me currently on your wait list? And if that number is 200, when I call today, when you call again in 6 months, you're going to ask, what's my current position on the wait list? And if they say 200, your next question is, have you had any vacancies and have they been filled? And if they have, your next question is, how come my position on the wait list is still the same, right? And if they can't give you a satisfactory answer, then you probably want to call the funding source. So in my case, it would be the rural development. Ask who is the rural development representative for that property and call them and let them know that you were told that there were vacancies that had been filled since the last time you called, but that your position on the wait list hasn't changed, and you'd like to know why. Okay, because there's a couple of possibilities. So one of them is on some properties, people that are currently holding VAWA paperwork, which is Violence Against Women Act paperwork, meaning they are a victim of domestic violence. Some properties give priority to people under the VAWA Act. Okay, my properties do not. That's part of the tenant selection plan. Another priority is given with my property, specifically FinchPlace, people with mobility disabilities. If I have a vacancy in an ADA compliant unit, I have to give that vacancy to somebody who needs ADA compliant living. So somebody who's in a walker or wheelchair that has to have an ADA unit, they get priority over everybody on the wait list. So I actually have to go through my wait list and look for the people that fall under that designation and give them first priority. That may be a reason why your position on the wait list didn't change. So there are valid reasons, but they're pretty low number of valid reasons, which is why you want to make that call and find out why. Because a lot of times, if the manager is really under the gun to fill that vacancy, they're gonna give it to the person that walked into their door, right? And while that is a violation of their rules, it happens, right? And I'm just being frank, it happens. I've seen it happen, and it's unfortunate. So the message here is that the search for housing is the responsibility of the applicant. They have to manage that process. They have to keep a good dialogue with all the properties that they're applying at, and they have to ask some tough questions and not be afraid to hold the manager accountable wherever they're applying. Does that make sense?
It does, and that's really, I think that's a very it's clear but a very important thing, and I think that's great information. Tom, we did have a question come in. Are there any online capabilities to check the waitlist status? Is there currently any online way?
Not with Housing Kitsap.
Okay.
Some properties may have the ability to look at your position on the wait list. One of the things to know about property management in general, but particularly affordable housing, the software we use is very, very, very expensive, and it's sold to us in modules. So we can buy an accounting module, we can buy a resident module, we can buy a waitlist module, we can buy a module that links us to the internet so that we can take applications. Like every single thing that we add to our software costs more, and it's insanely expensive. It's a huge part of our budget every year, and it's an annual subscription. Adding in a portal, an online portal to give people access to the wait list I'm not even gonna guess, it would be in the thousands of dollars. The other side of that is it would have to be software that actually had that capability, and a lot of them don't, right? We are, I believe they're considering updating our software to a different type, but I don't think that is a capability we would add in. I think they are looking at adding in a module that allows the applications to automatically upload into our system. Currently, I have to download the applications from our internet portal and then manually enter that information into our software. So eliminating that would eliminate a lot of the time I spend during my week, because we get a lot of applications every week. Even something like accepting payments online or accepting electronic payments is an additional module, which is why we don't currently do that, because it's very, very expensive. And then we also have to maintain a website that takes payments, and taking payments online. You're adding some internet security issues and things like that. You've got to upgrade your IT department. You know, there's a lot of things that really put barriers in our way. The thing to bear in mind, and this is outside of the conversation with applicants, but our properties, all affordable housing properties that I've worked at, are required to be self-sustaining. And what that means is that the rent that I collect, the rental assistance I receive from my funding source, and our funding sources give us a nominal amount for each occupied unit to get us closer to what they consider market rate housing rates, is what I have to pay for everything out of. I don't get any money from the county. I don't get any money from the state or the federal government outside of those sources. So I have to, all the work I do on my property, if I replace a roof, I have to make sure that it's in my budget for the year that I'm going to do it, and that I collect enough rent to pay for that roof, right? If I'm going to be replacing appliances, so every time a resident comes in and says, hey, my refrigerator is not working, can you get me a new one? I'm going to try and repair it before I try to replace it, because a repair might cost me $200, but I have yet to find a refrigerator for less than $750. And I have to pay for that out of the rents that I collect, the rental assistance I receive from my funding source, and then that really small amount that gives us a little bit of bump closer to market rate housing. When I say that bump towards market rate housing, it's not what we see as market rate housing rates. It's what they're determining on a federal level, and that includes a lot of very, very distressed economies, which bring that number way, way down. Does that make sense? Excuse me. So it's a situation where getting units filled is a priority, because we're not collecting rent, we're not collecting rental assistance, we're not collecting that little bump, which is what incentivizes a lot of property managers to just fill the vacancies, even though there is a process that goes into that. Back to best practices for applicants. I can't stress enough how important it is to communicate with every property and keep that logbook, in part because if you call me and say, hey, where I'm at on the wait list, I can, because our properties actually have an electronic wait list, I can search for your name. The properties that I was at previously did not have an electronic wait list. It was all paper. If you couldn't tell me at least the year that you applied, I wasn't going to be able to help you, because I didn't have time to go through the hundreds and hundreds of applications to try and find yours in that very, very thick, full file drawer of applications. So knowing when you applied, particularly if you've at least got the month, but day and month and year is super helpful. That's why that logbook is so important. And then keeping that journal of your communications. It also helps to remind you that at least every 6 months you want to call those properties and check in with them. You know, find out where you're at, find out if there's been any turnover. Are they anticipating any turnover? And the better relationship you have with that property manager, the more likely you are to have a successful transition when your name comes up on the wait list. So if I'm thinking a resident or an applicant, excuse me, that is calling me every 6 months, I'm going to remember them, and I see their name on a unit availability letter, I might pick up the phone and call that one. Say, hey, you obviously are really, really anxious. I just want to let you know I'm sending this letter out today. You've got 14 days to respond to it. But get in here as soon as you can. The other reason that is important is once those letters go out, it's a race. So whoever gets the paperwork, so I sent out 5 unit availability letters, and if you're number 1 on that list, but number 5 gets me all of their paperwork and I get an approval from compliance saying that their application has been approved, number 5 is getting that apartment because number 1 didn't do the work, right? So if you can't be timely and get me the information I need to get your application approved, then you're at risk of not getting that apartment. So it's really important that that communication, it's all about that. You've got to do the work. You've got to keep in contact, get the paperwork done.
So Tom, I have a question. If let's say you've bumped up to spot number 20 or number 10, so you're getting close, and obviously there's no way to predict how long that's going to be. Are there things that people should start gathering, information they should have at the ready, so if and when they receive that letter, they can act quickly, as opposed to being like, oh gosh, I got to figure out where to get that document from, or who? So could you share any?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So our certification process has basically three components: income, assets, and for senior and disabled residents or applicants, expenses. And when I say expenses, I mean medical expenses. So we have to verify your income. So if you are a recipient of Social Security, make sure you have your most current Social Security award letter, regardless of what type of Social Security it is. If you have multiple Social Security income streams, make sure you've got an award letter for each of them, right? It's a real simple matter to call Social Security in Silverdale and request it. They'll have it mailed to you in less than 7 days. Then you can bring that in with you, right? If you are a W-2 employee, meaning that you go to a job and you get paid and you get a W-2 at the end of the year and you file your taxes, then just make sure that you can provide the person in your organization that is going to fill out the income verification form. Usually it's HR, sometimes it's accounting, but the other thing to bear in mind is all of the verifications except for Social Security are required to be verified via third party, which means you can't bring me in your pay stubs until I've attempted to email or fax your organization outside of you to have them fill it out and fax it or email it back. So we're required to attempt to get that information. If I make 3 attempts and I don't get it back, then you can bring in your pay stubs, but you have to bring in 3 months worth of pay stubs, and then I have to calculate your income based on your last 3 pay stubs. The reason that might be a bad idea is that when I send the verification out to your employer, I'm asking for the last 12 months. But if I get the last 3 months from you and you've had a whole bunch of overtime, guess what? I'm determining your next 12 months income that's going to include all that overtime. Okay. So you want to make sure that your company, the organization, is going to be responsive and that they know this is coming so that they give me the most accurate information possible. The other side of that is assets. So if you have a checking and a savings account, make sure you've got a good, ideally you bring in your last statement, because then off of that statement, I will take your account numbers, put that in the verification form, and then I will send that off to the bank. Almost all banks are really responsive to those verification requests. They get them back within a couple of days. The only one that doesn't do the verifications that I've run into so far is Navy Fed. So if it's Navy Fed, you got to bring in 6 months worth of statements for assets. So I need the last 6 months bank statements, and I need all pages. So even if there's a blank page in there, if there's a page number, you got to bring it. I can't even tell you how many times I've had to send somebody back home to say, you need to bring me that page. And they say, but it was blank, it doesn't matter. It's got a page number on it. That's all that matters. So when my compliance people are looking at it and it says pages 1, 2, 3 of 7, and they're missing a page, they're going to deny that application because they want to see all those pages because they don't know that it's blank. And you telling them it's blank isn't sufficient. If you've got retirement income, or you've got like a 401k or an IRA, we'll need to know where that's held because we have to send a verification to them. Any place where you're holding assets, we have to verify. If you hold a sizable amount of cash, and some people do, then you have to report that, and we have a form for that. So it's a form that gets notarized where you say, I keep $5,000 in cash available to myself in case of emergency, and you fill that out and sign it in front of a notary as a declaration. The thing to bear in mind is with most programs, the amount of money you have in assets doesn't matter. What matters is the income derived from those assets. So if you've got $150,000 in a 401k or an IRA, it's okay. You can have that much money. You can have $1 million in a bank account. The caveat is if you've got $1 million and you're earning $50,000 a year, you probably won't qualify to live at our properties because you've got other income sources. But if that's your only income source, then yeah, you're going to be on my low income level wait list. And if I've exhausted my very low income wait list and your name comes up, Even as a millionaire, you're going to get into my property, right? Because it's based on the income you're earning. With regard to medical expenses, for seniors and disabled residents, you can bring me the name and phone number of everywhere that you spent out-of-pocket money on medical expenses. What that means is if you go to the dentist and you pay a $20 copay, and then you've got to pay the balance of your bill after your insurance pays their portion, and it's $1,000, you've just spent $1,020 of out-of-pocket money on a medical expense. For rural development, we count every dollar above 3% of your adjusted gross income as a further reduction of that income level. The reason that's important is that for every dollar we reduce your income, it's not an equivalent, but it's a reduction in your rent burden if you're receiving rental assistance. Okay, it may be a situation where, so rent is based on two numbers: basic rate and note rate. Basic rate is the minimum rent we can charge. Note rate is the maximum. If 30% of your adjusted gross income puts you between basic and note rate, that's your rent amount. If you have medical expenses that put you below basic rent, you're going to pay basic rent, but you're also qualified for rental assistance at that point. If you get assigned rental assistance, if I happen to have some available, then you're only going to pay 30% of your adjusted gross income. The more you collect in out-of-pocket medical expenses, the more it reduces your income. So it reduces your adjusted gross income number, the lower your rent burden is. So it's really important to keep track of that. The other thing that's important is if you pay for over-the-counter items, meaning, I always use this example for seniors because a lot of seniors are sensitive to sunlight as they age. And so their doctors recommend they go with very high SPF lotions if they're going to be outside. If your doctor recommends that you get a high SPF lotion, they're not going to prescribe that lotion necessarily, but tell you to go to the grocery store or to the pharmacy and buy that lotion. If you ask them to add that to your list of prescriptions, even though it's not prescribed, and you keep those receipts, then I can add all that up, including the tax you pay on that, to further reduce your rent burden. So all of those things are really important, both as an applicant and as a resident, if you fit the age qualification or disability qualification. Does that make sense?
That's great to know. That's great to know. And I just a quick follow-up question, and then I'll just also want to open it up in case other folks have questions. But for what time period should folks be tracking that? Like when they're actually sitting down with you and bringing you the receipts, how far back should they go?
We do a 12-month look back.
12 months. Okay.
Yep.
So basically, like if you know you're on your waiting list, you're going to want to start tracking.
Yeah. And what we'll do is if it's October 14th and you're in sitting with me doing your application and bringing me all your documents, I'm going to go from September 31st all the way back to September 1st of the previous year. That's the 12 months I'm going to look at. I'm not going to look at October because there's other things that might happen in October that would adjust that number and it wouldn't be in your favor. The following year, because RD, if I move you in on October 14th, your recertification date is going to be November 1st. We send out the first notification letter at the 90-day mark prior to the day your certification is due. The 12 months that I'm going to look at is going to be the day that 90-day letter went out and the previous. So there'll be in that initial year, that first annual certification, there's going to be a little bit of an overlap, but it resets itself in all subsequent years. The only time I adjust that is if you had a large medical expense that happened in that 90 days that we're not counting necessarily right then, I would be willing to adjust that. But however I adjust that, that becomes that 12-month period for all subsequent certifications. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds like it's a bit complicated.
It's a lot and it's very complicated. It's easier to explain in person to the applicants because I can just put it on the calendar, and just show them this is why we're doing this. And when I adjust that number, I explain it's because you had an extraordinary expense that will benefit you greatly in this move-in, and you'll have an entire year to enjoy the benefits of that reduced rent. So, and it's really up to them, because there's probably going to be a rent increase sometime in the next 12 months that they're there, and they might want to save that expense for their subsequent certification, because it'll reduce that rent after a large rent increase.
Got it. Through the
But it's a
following.
conversation that I'm willing to have with an applicant or resident at any point, right?
Okay, that's great. So if folks find that they have a large medical expense coming up, and whether they're currently in housing, or again, their number is up and they're looking into moving, you'll be able to work with them to determine.
And you want to make sure you have the conversation, definitely.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say, and this is, it's getting certified with a disability is very, very, very easy to do. You don't have to have an obvious disability, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a medical practitioner that certifies that you have disabilities. So the definition of a disability is very specific, but a close family member can read that definition and then certify that that resident does meet the requirements of somebody with a disability, and that's it. You're disabled, right? And nobody's allowed to ask you what that disability is, right? So there's nobody in affordable housing that has a legal right to know what your disability is, right? If it's obvious, it's obvious. If you've got a prosthetic arm or a leg, or in my case, brain, then it's obvious, right? And we can put that paperwork down. But if you have a mental disability, I'm not going to ask you about that. All I'm going to say is, if you claim a disability, I'm going to have you get a certification that you're disabled. And as long as we can show that it's a close family member or a very, very close friend or something like that, that's going to be sufficient, right? So I say that because that's a way to provide an opportunity to use those medical expenses that you have to reduce that rent burden that you're responsible for, particularly if you're getting rental assistance. And that applies to rental assistance through Section 8 or my rental assistance, which is RD provided and it's project-based, right?
Got it. Yeah. Okay. So thank you, Tom. So I'm seeing that we've got about 10 minutes left, if you're still okay hanging out with us for a little bit longer. So I just want to open it up. If anybody has any questions that they want to ask Tom, and just as a reminder, folks are muted, so you can go ahead and unmute yourself, or again, you can type into the chat box if you'd like to communicate that way. And while I give folks a second to do that, Tom, I'll just ask another question as well. So as far as the income requirements go, what if when somebody originally applies, and I'm going to just double check the wording, let's say they come in at moderate. Let's say when they're first applying, they're at moderate. They're on the wait list, they're not moving, but then there's a significant change in their income, and now they're very clearly within the very low income rate. Do they reapply? Do they come to you or wherever they're applying? What's the process?
Great question. So communication is key, right? You want to call all the properties and say, I have had a significant change in my income. I want to update my application to reflect that. And then I'd like you to tell me where I land on the wait list after you have corrected my application within your system, because it very much will move you to the very low income bucket if that's the case. The other side of that is if you have an increase in income and you don't report it, if your name comes up on the very low income bucket list and all of a sudden you're making $70,000 a year, I am going to deny your application, and you will never, ever, ever be able to reside in housing Kitsap property because you lied, right? And that's one of the absolute do not break this rule. Do not lie on your application. And if you have a change in circumstance, you report it. And that's whether you're an applicant or a resident. With regard to residents and RD, if you have an increase in income of $100 or more a month, you are required to report that, and we are required to do a recertification. If you have an adjustment in income of $50 or more to the negative, you can ask for a voluntary recertification, and we are required to honor that. And the reason you might want to do that is if you're getting rental assistance, it will reduce your rent burden if we recertify, and you've lost $50 or more a month, right? But again, communicate it and don't lie. If you have an increase in income, you need to do the same thing as if you have a decrease, even though that will remove you potentially from the wait list or put you in a less favorable position on the wait list. You'll still have a chance to move in. If you don't report that at the time and we find out about it, then you'll never, you're basically blacklisted from housing Kitsap properties.
Okay. Okay. Very, very good to know. Sounds like very important information. So it sounds like in general, again, be in communication if there's any changes, and whether that's a decrease, increase, anything. Okay. So Tom, I did have another question come in here. So Michael says a little off track, but it looks very relevant to me. So if a current landlord is willing to do a Section 8 with an existing tenant, is there a possible fast track with HUD to port the current apartment with the willing landlord?
Ask that again.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding it as well. So if a current landlord is willing to do a Section 8
To
with
accept a Section 8?
Sorry, say that again.
To accept a Section 8 voucher?
Yes, I
Okay.
think that's how I'm understanding it. So if they're willing to accept a Section 8 voucher, yeah, sorry, Michael, if you want to jump in to clarify. And we've got you on.
Okay,
oh, there you go.
Okay, a landlord says, okay, if you can get the Section 8, I'll accept it for this apartment. But I'm told it's almost impossible unless you're lucky on a draw. And that Section 8 is really not very realistic.
Okay, so I'm actually hearing a couple of different questions here. So so Section 8, Section 8 is a difficult program to navigate, for sure. What I will say is that Section 8 is awarded an annual amount of funds. And if that amount goes up, they can open up the wait list and make vouchers available. If it's stagnant, then they can't because they don't have any more money and it's all been allocated. If the wait list is opened up, they do use what's called a lottery system, but that's kind of a misnomer. So what they do is they open it up for, say, 7 days. So everybody applies within the 7-day time period. And when they get all those applications, they close the wait list again, and they shuffle them up like a deck of cards. The reason they do that is because there is a sizable number of people who do not have the same access to technology or same ability to use technology to fill out those applications. And they believe that that gives people who do have that access an unfair advantage when applying. So if you've got somebody who's an absolute whiz with a computer, and the second that program opens up, they're first in line to fill out their application. And then on the other side of that, you've got a senior or somebody with a disability, and it takes them 3 days to fill out that application. Everybody should have the same chance to be awarded a voucher. So that's why that lottery system is in place. I personally agree with that 100% because I've got a lot of residents who struggle mightily with technology, and it doesn't matter what age group they're in. It can be a challenge for people. The other side of that question that I heard is if a property owner or management company is saying, okay, we're going to accept Section 8, how do we navigate that? And it's actually pretty simple on the side of the property management company. They simply communicate with whoever is managing the Section 8 program and say, we are going to accept Section 8 vouchers here. And everything is done on the Section 8 side. Currently in Kitsap County, it's Bremerton Housing Authority that manages the Section 8 program. And so the resident would then get their voucher, get awarded their voucher. They do all the compliance paperwork, which means they do the same thing they do for me, which is income, assets, expenses to determine what their income is. Section 8 has the same goal as rural development, which is they target your rent at 30% of your adjusted gross income. And then the resident would pay their rent at 30% of their adjusted gross income, and Section 8 does a direct deposit to the property's operating account for the balance of that based on what the rental rate for the apartment is in total. So if the apartment is $1,000 a month and the resident has $250 is the 30% of their adjusted gross income, Section 8 would then send $750 to our operating account to cover the balance of that rent. So accepting Section 8 is not that difficult. A lot of property managers don't want to accept Section 8 and won't because they don't believe that demographic makes good renters, which is a absolutely gross and disgusting attitude to have. But it's a common belief in the property management world. In large part because we do see more challenges in people that have less means. I'm personally a believer in mixed housing. I would like to see all affordable housing have a certain percentage of their housing be market rate because studies have proved that people who are struggling financially that are in close proximity to people who are not struggling tend to do better because they're observing the things that are making them a little bit more successful. There's lots of studies that have proved that proximity is a positive thing for people who are struggling. But it's hard to find that kind of housing. And it's hard to fill that kind of housing on the market rate side because again, the attitude out there is that people that are struggling are criminals, drug addicts, alcoholics, all the things you hear when you talk about anybody that lives in an encampment or is living in an RV or something like that. Anyways, I could go on and on about how much that upsets me, but yeah.
That's a good start. Thanks.
Does that answer your question about the Section 8 stuff?
Well, part of it. I've also heard it said by a social worker at one point, and don't take this personally.
No.
It's not the property management's business to necessarily know if a person is on Section 8 or not. That's just an attitude. That if a landlord who owns a unit is willing to accept a tenant who can get Section 8, it ought to be portable more quickly because you would take care of a lot more people a lot quicker if it was a simple possibility that a landlord could be willing to accept that. And
Right.
is it anybody's business? There are lots of reasons why people have economic difficulties. So
And
I
agree.
hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I
But
think
that's like a
everybody
whole
should.
new approach to the system.
Yeah, I
It's
think everybody
complicated.
should be willing to accept Section 8. It shouldn't make any difference, but you're absolutely correct. The attitude out there, particularly in market rate housing, is that people that are getting that kind of assistance are not people they might want to rent to.
But I wanted to ask this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Regarding the porting portion of that, Section 8 is only ported between counties. It's not ported between properties per se.
Oh,
Caveat to
okay.
that is that if you are a Section 8 recipient living in housing, you do have to, if you're moving to another property that accepts Section 8, you port it through whoever is managing that program. But it's a pretty simple process. All it does is Section 8 has to inspect the units to make sure that they're safe, right? That's the only interaction that the property really has with Section 8 is that inspection, the pre-move-in inspection that the Section 8 inspectors do. Other than that, it's just Section 8 getting access to your routing and bank account information so they can deposit the checks electronically.
Yeah.
But the porting is all on the Section 8 side of that,
Okay.
including if you're moving from one county to another. So it's one housing authority communicating with your new housing authority to port that because they actually have to extract those funds from their annual budget and give it to the receiving county, right?
Thank you. I now want to let other people ask questions. Thanks for addressing this. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. My
Yeah,
pleasure.
thank you, Michael. Thanks for bringing that question to Tom and to us. So just before we wrap up here, any last minute questions for Tom?
I'm having a lot of difficulty maneuvering with Zoom, but I do have a question if you can hear me.
We can.
Okay. In Kitsap County, do you allow people from out of state to move into the affordable housing units, especially the senior units?
Yeah, we are not allowed to put any restrictions on people going on our wait list other than what's in our tenant selection plan. So where they currently reside isn't relevant. They could be living in another country and still get on our wait list. And if they've got the money to make the move, they're welcome to make the move. Absolutely. There's no restrictions on where you reside.
Yeah,
Thank
great question, Diane. That's an excellent question. I'm glad you brought that up. All right. So Tom, so if people have questions, would like follow up, what's the best number to call? Should they call Housing Kitsap? Should they get in touch with you?
I'm more than happy to field calls. Not necessarily all the calls would necessarily apply to me or my properties, but I'm happy to answer questions to anybody. They can call and leave a voicemail at either of my properties, or they can send an email if they've got questions. I can respond. If you're willing to just send out an email to everybody that's on the call, you can share my contact information. Don't share my cell phone, but share the 2 phone numbers for my properties and the 2 emails for the properties. I prefer to use those rather than my personal email as well, just because I've done them parts. They're all separate for separate reasons. Yeah, but the 2 property phone numbers and 2 property emails, and I'm happy to have conversations with anybody that wants to talk about it, especially if it's going to help somebody get into housing.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you, Tom. So probably the best way to do it is, if you are interested, go ahead and contact the Senior Community Center. You can ask for Katie, and I'll get in touch with you, and I can send you along the information and how to get in touch with Tom. So our number again, 206-842-1616. So again, you can just get in touch with us, and we'll make sure we get you connected to Tom. All right, Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. This was I've got 4 pages of notes. It was
That was my pleasure. Absolutely.